So without further ado, let's kick it off with Timothée Parrique, a researcher in ecological economics from the University of Lund in Sweden, joining us from southwest France. Timothée, over to you.
Have you ever been to one of these all-you-can-eat buffets? You know, the cheap, dirty stuff. It's cheap, you always regret it, you eat too much. If you don't get there first, you'll have nothing but dirty dishes. I cannot think of a better analogy to think of the last 50 years of global development. I want to invite you to think of any economy as a superorganism. A superorganism that sucks in energy and materials and that push out waste. Every year, the global economy extracts 106 billion tons of material. Half of that is minerals like clay and gravels and sand, and then you have biomass, and you have, of course, fossil fuels, and a whole bunch of metals. This is what the economy eats, and it is increasingly hungry. Back in 1965, when the novel Dune was first published, the economy required 25 billion tons of material to run. Forward 1984, when Dune was first adapted as a film, that number was up to 41. And then up to 58, when Dune was adapted as a TV show. And this year, 2024, Dune Part 2, and we have our superorganism, the global economy, eating 106 billion tons of materials. A large economy requires a large amount of resources and produces a large amount of waste. So you take that 106 billion tons of materials, almost 80% of that quickly get dissipated as solid and liquid waste, and especially as emissions. So greenhouse gas emissions have almost doubled from around 20 billion tons in the 1970s to 43 billion tons a couple of years ago. These waste goes on creating an array of problems. Greenhouse gases destabilizes the climate. Some kind of waste leads to eutrophication, which kills biodiversity, changing the land, destroy natural habitats, which also leads to biodiversity loss. That's the famous planetary boundaries. We know them. The main message, and you can see here clearly with all the red, is that the global economy is biophysically obese. We are overshooting planetary boundaries. Except we is perhaps too broad a term, because we do not all bear the same responsibility in that ecological overshoot. Let's talk a bit about environmental inequality. And let's start by looking at the size of plates. So let's look at the left side of the graph, where we see high-income and upper-middle-income countries. And we compare this to the line, which is the global per capita average, which is basically the average plate that an average human gets at the buffet. Here we see very clearly that the plates of high-income countries and upper-middle-income countries is a bit larger than the average, and the plates of other countries is a bit smaller than the average. When we look at cumulative emissions, we see that these inequalities, they're not only static, they've been going on for a very long time. So this is emissions inequality. We see that the climate change that we experience today is mostly the result of the emissions of early industrialized nations basically Europe and North America here. They were the one first arriving at the buffet. And they've been at the buffet for a long time. Today, of course, the mix is changing. You have countries like China and India that are arriving to the buffet. Of course, the US and Europe is still pretty much there, enjoying the food. And you have other countries, mostly low-income countries, that are still being prevented accessing the restaurant, basically. We need to look at the size of the plate. We also need to look at the impact of eating the plate. And this is what we can do on this graph. What we see here on the left is that high-income countries, even though they have the highest environmental footprints, they're also the one bearing the least environmental cost. Basically, they export the environmental mess linked with their very high level of resource use elsewhere, which is the opposite for the three categories of countries that we see in that graph. And now to add economic insult to ecological injury, it is high-income countries that are benefiting, that are appropriating the bulk of global value added. So basically, early industrialized, rich, high-income countries, they get the resources cheap, they don't have to pay for the environmental mess, and they pocket all the profit. This is why some people have come to call this an imperial mode of living. Imperial because the economic growth, the activity, the development of high-income countries is dependent on an appropriation of cheap or free human and natural resources from other countries, very often in the global south. And this is very clear when we look at climate change. So look at this graph, which is a perfect example of this asymmetry between responsibility, capability, and vulnerability. So the light blue, and let's start to look at the top 10% on the left of the graph. That shows you the 800 million richer people on Earth, including everyone in this room. So these people, they own 76% of world wealth. They emit 48% of total emissions, and they will suffer 3% of climate-related impact. Let's now look at the right side of the graph, where we see the bottom half of the population, 4 billion people. And here, the situation is reversed. These people, they own, it's so small, I cannot even read it from here, 2% of world wealth. They emit 12% of total emissions, but these people with very low capability are very vulnerable. They will bear around 75% of climate-related impact. So we have this situation, high-income countries feast on the buffet, low-income countries clean the dishes. That's the problem. You've heard it before. So what's the solution? Here, everyone has their own solution. It's like it's just Netflix of sustainability. Everyone will tell you they found the best way of just solving this asymmetry. So you have everything in there. You have people that want to green capitalism, but you have also people that want to dismantle capitalism. You have people that think we need to make the economy circular, change the way we design. You have degrowth people, post-growth people. You have eco-socialism. Woo! You have voluntary simplicity. Sounds cool. Ecofeminism. You have green growth. Should we green growth? Should we green businesses? You have solar punk. You have geoengineering. You have animal welfare, activism, eco-spirituality. Everyone has their line of thinking. But the problem that we're not using this toolbox as a toolbox. We have been spending years trying to figure out who's right, who's got the best silver bullet to solve this. But I'm not sure this is a problem with a solution. I'm not sure there is one paradigm to rule them all. And so, what I want to tell you today is how we can reconcile some of this paradigm. Don't check it out. This is not a real film. This is just a slide. I see you with your phone. It's a slide made so I can tell you about a specific fight between degrowth, eco-socialism, and green growth. These have been fighting for the last 20 years. So degrowth, they think socialism is too productivist, and they think eco-modernism and green growth is fundamentally incompatible with sustainability. Eco-socialism, they criticize degrowth, and they also criticize pro-capitalist eco-modernism. And eco-modernism, they hate both eco-socialism and degrowth. Don't get these three at a wedding on the same table. It's a mess. And I think it's a shame because these three paradigms and so many others, they are so much stronger together than against each other. So, for example, the first step when we approach a sustainability issue could be just to avoid the most sustainable resource is the one you can afford not to use. So this first approach of degrowth and post-growth, what we could term eco-minimalism, to avoid a few heart attacks in the room for now, it's pretty powerful because it can simplify needs. And it can simplify needs as much as you can. You cannot, of course, avoid doing everything. So what you cannot avoid, then you can shift and share. So that's the second step. And eco-socialism is pretty good at this. It's a matter of redirecting what we have, the infrastructure, toward socially useful production. It's a matter of better sharing the stuff that we have already produced so that we can maximize well-being, so that we can decouple well-being from ecological footprint. Whatever you cannot avoid, whatever you cannot shift and share, then we switch to the third one. You improve whatever you're left with, then you mobilize the power of technological progress in order to make that thing you cannot avoid and you cannot shift and share as efficient as possible. And yes, you've seen the superheroes. I think they can be good symbols of that. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Their power is that they can make themselves smaller, eco-minimalism. Shift and share, we have Mystique, which can just change its molecular composition to shift shape. And we have Shuri from Black Panther that can just science the shit out of any problem. I want these three to work together and not against each other. And let's try to see how that works for a specific problem. Transport, huge issues. Let's start by avoiding things. So we can simplify mobility needs so that as a scholar, I don't have to just go to every single conference around the globe. We can actually remove specific demand for mobility. We can also relocalize, rearrange production so that we don't have to move stuff that much around. We won't be able to do this for everything. So, boom, Mystique is coming in. Then whatever we have left, we need to share. So better just to have cars in common and just invest in public transport and make some modes of mobility more accessible. Again, we're getting to the third step. We will be left with specific technologies. Let's improve them. Smaller, lighter, recyclable vehicles and all that stuff that we can mobilize to shrink their footprint. And you see it's a circle. Then you can restart. You can restart avoiding shift and share and improve. And avoid, shift, share, and improve. And again, and again, and again, every time reducing the ecological footprint of your activity. You can do the same for food. Same. Avoid step, eating less animals, phasing out faraway product, avoiding high-impact foods. All of that we do. We simplify needs as much as possible. Whatever is left, then we do differently. We redirect, we cooperate, we share, we change the technology we're using. And whatever we're left using, again, we just use the full power of collective intelligence to make sure this is done in the most efficient way. This is really my main message today. I don't want to end up like this, beat up and bloody after 7 hours and 19 minutes of fighting for the whole thing to be declared a draw. This is, I feel, what we've been doing for the last 20 years, fighting between eco-modernists advocating green growth, degrowthers advocating a steady-state economy and post-growth, and eco-socialists advocating whatever they are advocating. What we need to do instead is to form the Avengers of Sustainability. So at this point, of course, I wanted the theme of Avengers to just play very loud, but I can't because of copyright, so I'm going to do it with my mouth. Bum, 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 bum. You see the thing? And of course, you'll notice that I've mixed DC Comics and Marvel superheroes, right? And that's precisely the point. I don't care in which team you are. What we need is to unite forces. Boom. To fight together with many ideas, uniting to face one of the greatest threats of all time. And really focusing on what unites us and not what divides us. I want you guys today to look around. Everyone here has a power, and everyone has strength and weaknesses. And so now, of course, with a slide like this, I cannot just end up with a thank you and leave the stage. I need to end up with like some kind of grand Hollywood-sounding sentence, something like, we must fight together. The future of life on Earth depends on it. Except that this time, this is actually true.